okay, wind yourself up and get going. I was very upset with the idea that I had to stop, but I knew I had to. Let me mention this. I was very young at one point. Incidentally, my sister and I had, as I mentioned, no father, but we had, my mother's parents were from Russia, and in many instances when we were left as young kids in a bad situation, so bad that and my mother even would leave, or whoever was with us would leave. My grandparents occasionally would come and pick us up and take us to their house for a while until we were shoved off somewhere else. I remember my grandfather was a singer, wonderful baritone voice, and I remember listening to Madame Schumannheink about her 900th farewell performance. And as young as I was, I remember hearing this voice, which my grandfather had told me had been wonderful, magical, sounding horrible, just horrendous. And I remember thinking, not probably in so many words, but it always stayed with me. Whatever it is you do, don't allow yourself to go beyond the time when you are capable of doing it. Don't give these farewell performances. And then the same thing happened when I saw Danilova many years later in another many, many farewell performances. And I felt that same thing. So a time came when I realized that I don't think I should dance anymore. And so I didn't. But one of the great loves of my life has always been teaching. I love to teach. I have a real passion for teaching. I love making dancers.
Among Miss Butler's former students was Paul Taylor, who writes, "In 1951, I was extremely fortunate to be one of Ethel's beginning students. She was not only my first teacher, but the one who has had the most lasting effect. Since then, when watching many of her classes, my admiration has doubled, and I often asked myself how she does it, what makes her teaching so special. One might as well be asking about the mysterious forces of nature, but there are several obvious specifics that set her apart. Her total commitment to the art form, for one. It shows in the way that she transfers the joy of moving, in the way she instills confidence, in the way she insists on attention to detail and full involvement, rather than on peripheral or decorative dancing, and in her extraordinary patience. And then, of course, there's her knack for finding the exact words to impart all of this clearly. As a teacher, Ethel Butler continues to have a significant impact on American modern dance. She is one of the few remaining pioneers in the field who is able to pass on original concepts and who continues to contribute her own.
And the thing that makes for exciting dancers is your own individual, and it is totally individual, sense of musicality. Now, what I mean by that, and I find it very lacking in a great deal of dance now, which upsets me very much. If you are moving 1, 2, 3, what happens on 3 must lead into 1. 3 is not the end of anything. 3 is there so that 1 is possible. So that it's not, if you're working in this slow melodic line like this as an example, which I'm using, it's not 1, 2, 3, it's the end of my life. No, it has to have that same sense of pulling out on the 3. Think about that all the time. How you connect one movement into the next one. And that's true even if you're doing percussive movements. It's the vitality and energy of the space in between that is very, very necessary. All right? And as I say, it's very individual. It depends on the size of you, the shape of you, the length of you, the breadth of you, the whatever, your personality, your life experiences, but it's got to be there.
Kenneth Rinker, a former member of Twyla Tharp's company, as well as a dancer in Miss Butler's own company, writes, I was born too late to see Ethel perform with Martha, but I was around at the right time to study with her and to dance in her company. How lucky I was and thankful I am for her involvement in my career. Most lucky that she remains a friend from whom I continue to learn, who retains a sense of discovery and adventure in dance and in living, calling to mind when I first stepped into an empty dance studio in awe of its intimidating and luxurious space and wanting so desperately to fill it with a body that could dance on command. Ethel helped me to achieve that and more. Ethel is one of a kind.
Speaking of students in a class, one that I always found very amusing was when I was teaching at Bennington during the summer. Martha would occasionally come into the class unannounced to observe the students. And she walked in one day, this large class I was teaching, prior to my starting the class. And people were sitting around on the floor and they were chatting. And they were sort of leaning against the wall and they were doing all these types of things. And Martha said, no, this is not the way you must behave. She said, I never want to walk into a studio with people who are studying dance and find them sitting around chatting. She said, you come in and you warm up. And so everybody, of course, immediately proceeded to find a spot on the floor and warm up. And she said that now that's the way it should be always. Never do you come into a dance studio and not warm up. You immediately start moving your body. She came in 2 days later, again, unannounced, and everybody was diligently warming up. They learned their lesson. They were warming up, except one young lady who was leaning in a dejected fashion with her back against the back wall of the studio, and Martha said, you, why aren't you warming up? What are you doing there? And this young lady said, but Miss Graham, I warmed my spot and somebody else took it. Now feel the body opening the arms. Be sure your torso is right over your pelvis, not behind it. And look directly forward. Make the left hip turn you. And this is not shoulders, it's shoulder blades. And swing it. And open. Bounce. When I was at Mills College, Jose and I got very friendly, and my birthday is in July, and he decided that he wanted to give me the best birthday party I ever had. Incidentally, I've really never had birthday parties, and so he gathered some people together and myself, and he took us off to Monterey, California. He had rented or actually hired, because the men working on the boat, a boat with a whole lot of fishing rods so we could go fishing. We went out on the water and went fishing, and just incidentally, we were drinking some wine during this trip, and we were feeling no pain and having a lot of fun. And I don't remember ever catching a fish, but that didn't matter. And then we went back to Monterey, and he took us to a wonderful restaurant, and we had a whole lot of frozen daiquiris, and great meal. And this was my birthday party, and it was so touching to have somebody from another company, because frankly, in those days, I don't know whether I should say this. In those days, if you were a member of one company, you didn't really become very friendly with anybody in the other company. There was a lot of what's the word I want? A lot of, I don't know, maybe it was jealousy, or maybe it was just something that was supposed to be. I have no idea. I never understood it, and I was probably one of the only people who enjoyed people from the other companies, and spoke to them, and enjoyed their work, and palled around with them on occasion. I can even remember when the summer of Mills, I went at Louis' suggestion, I went to Santa Fe. Well, first to Gallup, New Mexico, for the Indian Festival. And Louis was, it's hard to believe, but they had, in those days, I hope they're still not doing that, they had what they called judges to judge the American Indian folk dance. Now, it's unbelievable. I can't imagine that it happened, but it did. And Louis was one of the judges, and he didn't like it any more than I did, and he thought it was a pretty horrible thing to do, but that's what it was. And then a couple of people drove me on to, after the festival was over, on to Santa Fe. I went there with no reservation, nowhere to stay. I was wandering around the streets of Santa Fe, totally enchanted with the whole thing. And I realized that I had no place to stay, and there wasn't any space in a hotel, so I heard about the fact that they had put some railroad cars on the track right at the edge of town, and that they set up cots in the cars, and you could go there and spend the night, sleep on one of the cots. They were right one alongside of each other for a quarter. So I went there, and I slept there that first night. The next day, I was wandering around the streets, and well, the first thing that happened was that I ran into Hanya home, and she said, "Oh, where are you staying?" So I said, well, I slept in a railroad car. And so she had a cot. She was there in a hotel with her son, and she had a cot sent up to the room, and I spent the next night there. And now this was Hanya home befriending a Graham person. Then the very next day, our wonderful Louis found out what I had done, and he was horrified, so he pulled some strings and got me a hotel room. And I stayed there in Santa Fe, going to all the pueblos, and I stayed there until I had enough money just to get a Greyhound bus ticket back to the East Coast. 2, and lift, and push off the hip, pull it out. Now don't fall onto your back. Pull. 1, 2. And don't rush this. 3 and 1. Open and Make it all in the back, not the arms. I think there was probably no doubt whatsoever that what was going on in that period what's the word? It was something tremendous. It was alive and vibrant and explorative and many new forms, new ways of doing things. I don't necessarily think that that's what let's say the big four at that time in New York, whom I mentioned before, Martha, Doris, Charles, and Hanya. I don't think that that's necessarily what they set out to do, but that's what they were doing, and it was just I doubt that anybody, I'm sure everybody realized the same thing. Everybody felt the same way, even the ones who found it ugly and stark and dismal. I'm sure they probably wouldn't have said anything about it unless they realized that it was something very important. And repeat, 1 and 2. Drop your head down completely so the back of the neck is elongated. And lift. Back into the floor. Now use 2 counts, no more, no less. Keep lifting through the center of the body, torso directly over the pelvis. And always make the body open the arms. I was so into the dance, and I was so into trying to find a nickel to get a bowl of soup that I knew there was a depression. I saw people sitting on street corners trying to sell an apple and all of this, but just being totally involved in the dance, and also Martha, because I was her confidant, I guess you could say. I held her hand when she was ill. She thought nothing of calling me up in the middle of the night and saying, come over to my place, I'm very depressed. And I would just go, and it wasn't even necessary for her to talk to me. She just needed to have somebody there that she felt comfortable with. And even though I was married, I would jump up out of the marriage bed and go over to Martha. I did everything for her. We were very close, and so that was my world. That and just literally trying to survive. Now I knew that there was a depression. I knew that people were in very poor straits. I knew that there was a strong, I guess you could say, anti-government group going that were fairly active. As a matter of fact, I knew several members who joined the Communist Party, and there was a good deal of disenchantment with what was going on in the States. But frankly, I'm a little embarrassed to say that those were not the things that touched me. They should have. But maybe it was my youth. Maybe it was maybe it was the kind of childhood I had in which I just didn't want to be unhappy anymore. Try to have a complete sense of honesty in things that you do. For instance, if you're doing something like the bounces, and your focus is a down one of the earth, the floor, or whatever is down there, don't go down saying, I think I'm down. I think that's down. I think that's the earth. That's not it. It must be it. So that when you go over, for instance, for the bounces, you should have this long, long neck here, like a Modigliani neck. And if you got a long neck, show it off because they're wonderful. Rather than thinking you're there, because you're not. So that you have this total sense of honesty in everything that you do, and simplicity as you do it.
In 1944, Miss Butler moved to Washington, D.C. with her first husband, David Campbell, also a Graham Company member. Shortly thereafter, Miss Butler formed her first studio and dance company. The studio provided a haven for young emerging dancers, a place where they were trained in the Graham technique and could discover the discipline of professional standards and performing. During that period, Miss Butler also began teaching young people at what was to become the Georgetown Day School. The Ethel Butler Company performed and toured throughout the 60s. During that time, Miss Butler continued to teach both at her studio and at Howard University. In 1972, she founded the Washington Dancers in Repertory, a company which performed not only Miss Butler's work, but also dances by other local and nationally recognized dancers and choreographers. From 1977 to 91, Ethel Butler taught at the University of Maryland at College Park, and in 1992 and 93, she was invited to teach at the Graham School once again. Miss Butler regularly teaches at the Paul Taylor Studio, and in 1992, traveled to Korea to teach as part of ADF Seoul.
In the early 40s, I did a lot of soul searching and realized that, desire or not, that there was no way that I was going to be able to find out if I had the ability to do anything on my own unless I left Martha, because she absorbed all my time and energy and devotion and dedication. So I spoke to her about it. Now, usually when people left Martha's company, she was not very happy about it. But I had a long talk with her, and she agreed with me, much to my astonishment. And contract one, and release. Contract, release. And use your feet in both directions as far as they'll go. My life in dance, what do I want to say? First of all, I'd like to say that I am totally convinced that it saved my life because of the horrendous childhood. It was, I think that if I hadn't found it and I hadn't done it, that I shudder to think what would have happened to me. I think I probably would be a far less stable person, and I might have run into a great deal of trouble. It has been my total life ever since I started it, and I would recommend it to anybody, even if you didn't want to dance professionally. It's a wonderful thing to do. It's a wonderful thing to be able to move this body around.